what happened is that the boat took off going approximately 125, 130 miles an hour, and it came over backwards. And I was told by an old veteran years ago when I first started doing this, Greg, whatever happens, if the thing gets out of shape, you get the hell away from that boat. Man's name was Al Bush. And those words were right there in my mind. When I tipped over backwards, I was literally standing in the bottom of the boat, upside down, pushing myself out of the boat.
Welcome to Powerboat Talk, the podcast where we talk everything performance boats with your host, Joe Road.
So welcome to Powerboat Talk. Today I have the pleasure of another return visitor, Mr. Greg Shoemaker, who is a jet boat expert, drag boat expert, owner of GS Marine, and just an all-around knowledgeable and good guy. So thanks for talking to me again, Greg. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what are you up to right now? We kind of started talking about this.
Well, I come in in the morning, and I usually get in pretty early. I don't know. I don't know if I should tell people how early I get in because phone calls. But I come in and I go to my computer and I check my emails, and I have usually during the week I have 4 or 5 different questions that I've answered previously, but I'm just kind of refreshing people's minds on things that they can and cannot do.
So you've been, for people that don't know, for 100 years. By the way, you've been alive for like 100 years, and you've been boating about that long. So you were like the jet boat tech columnist in hot boat and then performance boats, I believe. I don't know if you ever did it with speedboat, but you've been answering these tech questions for like forever. So, I mean, do you not have like an archives of them? I mean, did you save all those or?
No, most of those they show up. Either they show up to the editor, which is still Brett Bain, and Brett will email those to me, and then we will answer them. And we haven't been doing much with speedboat. We did it in hot boat and we did it in performance boats. But I look at a lot of the questions that are asked on the internet today, and there's a lot of knowledge out there, whether that's good or bad. Sometimes I have to bite my tongue because some information that people are getting is incorrect in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked about this a few times, and I'm the same. I watch those things and I answer some, but sometimes by the time you get to the question, and it can be a basic question, but by the time you see it, there's 25 crazy, dumb answers, and you just feel bad for that guy that's just, especially if he's a new guy and he legitimately needs some information, and he's just got spun in 25 different directions. And a lot of times I'll just private message that guy and go, hey, you don't know me from Adam, but here's the truth. And, and a lot of times they'll DM me back and say, man, thanks a lot. I didn't know, I'm so confused after hearing all these guys. But, it's good people are chiming in to help new guys, but I kind of wish, like, look, if you really don't know, kind of let the guys, because sooner or later you're gonna chime in. There's several guys. Brad from SoCal Jets, he'll chime in. I mean, sooner or later somebody's gonna chime in with the right information. But
well, we talked about it earlier about running a jet boat on the trailer, and when somebody rebuilds a pump, the tolerances between the wear ring and the impeller are on the plus side. They're, with the pump being put together correctly, you should have about 10 to 20 thousandths per side, which is a total of somewhere between 24 to 30 thousandths clearance on the wear ring to the impeller. And then one of the things that we've learned through the years is that we go ahead and move the impeller forward on the shaft, and the relationship between the impeller and the suction housing, we get it down to 25 to 30 thousandths. Well, people will ask me, how do I run a jet boat on the trailer? My answer to them is that there's only really one area that I can think of that would be affected by running the boat on the trailer. If the boat has been run in clean water where there's no sand or debris in the pump, it's always a good idea to dump a little bit of water into the pump. But for prolonged running, the one area that does not get lubricated is the packing. And you've got a stainless steel shaft, and you've got a packing material. Usually what is used today is a graphite based packing, and running it for a long period of time, you will generate heat between the shaft and the packing. You can glaze the packing. Thus, when you put the boat in the water to run it, you could potentially have a leak between the shaft and the packing. I would prefer that anybody that's going to run the boat, especially like breaking in a camshaft or something like that, that they go ahead and try to do as much of that in the water rather than trying to do it on the trailer.
Couple questions there. For a guy that does have to do it, what's the prevention on the packing? Should he back the packings off and loosen it up while you're on the trailer if he had to do it?
The most sensible thing would be to, if you can access the drive line, I would disconnect the drive line and try not to spin the pump on the trailer. Other than that, you can start it, get your basic timing, maybe a minor carburetor adjustment, all taking place in just a couple minutes, and then do your final fine tuning out on the water.
Okay, perfect. Now, I think we both agree that the perfect scenario is, especially if you've got a fresh pump, because like what Greg said, when blueprinting or overhauling a pump, one of the most important things, besides making sure you got a good fresh bearing, is that you've got that impeller to wear ring clearance where it started originally, where the factory set it, or actually even a little tighter maybe than the factory, but you get that tolerance all back to where it should have been. So everything's tight. So especially when you first do a pump, it's a really good idea if you can go to the local lake and just back the thing down and get the water, fill that pump, get it in and around the wear ring, get everything lubricated with the water before you start it. Because there is a lot of people that just flat say you can't run them out of water. So we've already talked about the fact that there's clearance everywhere. The only parts that touch in that pump are on a roller bearing or a hardened shaft and a Bakelite bushing up front that's oiled. So technically, nothing really touches that could hurt it by running it out of water. Now, again, because you've got tight clearances, you run that thing out of water and you zing it to 4,000, 5,000 RPM, well, an impeller can grow. I mean, you want to be careful about that too. But for the most part, the thing has clearance and it's not going to kill anything. The other thing, you said dump water into the pump. When we see guys all the time where they'll put a T on the inlet and they'll run some water back into the pump. Well, that really doesn't do much, right? I mean, it doesn't hurt, but it really doesn't get into that wear ring to impeller cavity to really lubricate it like it does if you back it into the water.
Well, the hole that sends water to the engine is approximately 3/8 of an inch, well, maybe a half an inch.
Mm-hmm.
And when you back flush the water to the pump, one of the things that people make the mistake on is that the water is going to travel to the easiest access.
Yeah, right.
So by putting the T in there, you need to kind of restrict the water going to the pump slightly because you don't want to starve the engine.
Mm-hmm.
and not getting water to the engine.
Mm-hmm.
The other mistake that we have, in fact, we had one here last week, where you never start or never turn the water on unless the engine is running. We've had guys that actually have hydraulic the cylinder by turning the water on before they start the engine. So you should start the engine, turn on the water, make your adjustments. When you're done, you will shut off the water and then shut off the engine.
If you don't have a way to back the thing in the water, yes, then the next best thing, actually it's even better, is that you can disconnect the drive line and don't let the thing spin at all while you're running the motor. There's also, which is a safety thing, and I don't know if where you stand on these, but there's a thing called the jetaway that basically it's a safety. It's almost like a pop-off valve. So if you have a good high-performance fast boat, it's good to have some kind of a safety relief. A jetaway is like a mechanical one, which is clutch dogs, and it's a unit that goes between the drive shaft and the pump, and it actually can release. So if you have one of those, you can actually disengage that, and then your pump won't turn as well, right?
That's correct. I will add this to your comment. The jetaway and the pop-off really perform two different functions. The jetaway will freewheel. It doesn't dissipate any of that water. If you're going 100 miles an hour and then all of a sudden the motor stops, the jetaway will disengage the impeller, but the water has to go, that pressure has to go somewhere.
Okay.
And in doing that, a pop-off, I feel, is also a good thing to have. If I had to choice between the two items, I would go with the pop-off first and the jetaway second. But I'm not opposed to having both of them in the boat. The boat that we run in unblown fuel jet, we have a jetaway and we also have a pop-off.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know you could run both of them, but that's the way you described it. It totally makes sense.
Yes. So the jetaway works to disengage the rotation of the pump, but the jetaway allows that pressure, that 100 mile an hour worth of pressure, to go somewhere other than causing what we call bucketing. And what will happen is that at speed like that, the pressure on an average boat, let's say an average river boat, from 80 to 110, it's probably seeing anywhere from 45 to 50 psi in the suction housing. But when if that boat loses power, that pressure will rise because the impeller is not able to cycle the water out the nozzle, and so you're going to have a pressure rise. And what will happen is usually the boat will nose in, and the tail will lift, and it'll blow the tail because it's overcharging with too much water.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like at what speed? I mean, I know there's not a clear-cut speed, but if you've got a fast boat, you should have something. And obviously the jetaway is going to be a lesser expensive thing to put on. It's actually quite a bit easier to put in too. So, Dad, at what speed do you recommend your customers put something like that on?
You know, I've seen guys have problems at 60 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour.
Wow.
It really does depend on the conditions and the type of situation you've actually put the boat into.
Mm-hmm.
To have one safety device is going to help you more than the other.
Mm-hmm.
But when it really comes down to it, the jetaway is a much easier unit to install.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to remember, you're going to be moving everything forward in the boat approximately 4 inches.
Oh, okay.
placement of the engine is going to change. You're probably going to have a situation where the interior might need to be modified. The pop-off, on the other hand, unless it's a full setback, the pump usually is not far enough out the back of the boat to incorporate a pop-off, and either a modification to the transom is in order, or it requires moving the handhold cover completely out of the back of the boat.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The other misconception that I get, or a question that I get, well, I'm going to move my handhold cover all the way out the back of the boat. Well, on a transom that's angled, that's really hard to do. On a transom that's flat, it's a lot easier to do. On all the race boats that we put together, we move the back of the intake, or the back of the shoe will be even with the back of the boat. Mm. And that will, on a flat transom, that will put the pop-off out the back of the boat. Mm-hmm. On, let's say, a California Performance, if we move that intake to the back of the boat, the handhold cover is only exposed about 3/4 of the way out of the boat. Thus, some fiberglass work has to be done in order to put a jetaway on, say, an angled transom boat. The other thing that I don't like to do is that guys will completely, unlike a race boat where we run the boat in ideal conditions, I highly recommend a pump race. But what they'll do is, on a lake boat, they'll cut the hole and run it all the way out the back of the boat. That, to me, is not a good thing to do. I don't recommend doing that. I always, if I'm doing a lake boat, I always try to leave a band of fiberglass, approximately 1 inch in width, that will tie the right side and left side together. And that's as far back on a lake boat that I'll put the intake. That way, going down the lake in rough conditions, you've got a 700 or 800 pound boat, especially if you get it into choppy water that wants to drop, it wants to go through the bottom of the boat. Wow. And by eliminating that band of fiberglass from the right side to the left side, you open yourself up to breaking the intake loose in the bottom of the boat, and then you're going to have to go in and reset the intake. We see this on a lot of factory boats where the manufacturer has moved the pump all the way out the back. Mm-hmm. Done that, guys will come in and they go, Greg, I've got a real bad water leak, and I'll fill the boat up with water, and invariably it's cracked around the intake itself. And so the only way to fix that is that you got to pull the motor, you got to pull the pump, you got to pull the intake, clean it, reset it, reinstall the pump, reinstall the motor. So thus it becomes quite costly.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Like no less than like an inch of fiberglass. You're talking on the back of the transom, like at the top of the pump where the cutout would be, right?
It would be on the bottom.
Oh, on the bottom.
It would tie the right side to the left side.
Oh, so the very bottom, you're talking about from the bottom up. You don't want less than an inch there.
Right, exactly.
Gotcha. I didn't think about that part.
That still maintains the strength of the bottom and the right to left. And then a lot of times, depending on how far the pump is moved out, I'll recommend a pump race that will tie the right stringer to the left stringer, so you have less likely to, after you repair the broken intake, you don't want it to happen again. So we'll put a pump race that will attach to the pump and then attach to the right side and the left side, giving it more structural integrity back there.
Yes, so you run that pump brace, it'll kind of go underneath the bearing cap, right? And ties to the suction and then the two stringers.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. At what point do you, I mean, it seems like everybody, the first thing they do these days is they set, they'll go to all the trouble and set a pump back. At what point do you think that that's worth doing?
Well, the concept, and we do it, it's automatic in the race boats.
Oh, sure. Sure.
What it does is that you're moving everything farther back in the boat, thus less wetted surface, the faster the boat's going to go. Mm-hmm. There are some boats that just because of bottom configuration and strake design, they're just not candidates for moving the pump all the way back. Mm-hmm. I have a boat like that. One thing that will move the thrust line back, especially if you have a split bowl pump, would be just put a droop suit on it. Mm-hmm. And we've learned by putting a wedge between the bowl and the droop suit and wedge it upside down, we're lowering the thrust line, thus generating more lift and getting the boat to, to run down the lake at less wetted surface. It's usually, I've done a couple boats that through the years, where one of the other things too is that rather than moving the pump back, be sure and check the bottom of the boat for hook. There's a couple boat manufacturers where the right side can have as much as 3/4 of an inch of hook in it. Well, that's like trying to go fast with your diverter down, mm-hmm. or that's like trying to go fast with your cavitation plates buried. So once you correct the vehicle, a lot of times moving the pump back is not necessarily the answer.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So the biggest benefit though of moving the pump back is just getting the weight back and getting the thing to lift.
Yeah, and just less wetted surface in the water generates more speed.
Gotcha. Well, awesome. We kind of did a little recap of what we were going to talk about this morning, and tech stuff was going to be down the road, but I'm glad we got right into it. This is awesome.
I'm glad to. I can share my experiences. See, the thing is that through the years, I made a number of mistakes. A lot of stuff was trial and error back in the early days. So what I'm able to share now is that I can help someone, instead of going in the wrong direction, I can point them in the right direction just out of previous experience. Mm-hmm. So, I have one of my crew members, his boat would not stay in the water. It would drive itself completely out of the water. And the problem is that the bottom of the boat was designed to make a lot of lift. Mm-hmm. Back in the 70s and 80s, a lot of manufacturers wanted to put a 454 or a 464 or a 455 Oldsmobile in a little 18-foot boat, and they wanted to sell it and be able to tell the customer that this boat will go 60 miles an hour. Well, when you have basically all the horsepower out of the three major engine suppliers back then, what some of the manufacturers did in order to hit that 60 mile an hour marker, they would put a lot of lift in the boat. And by doing that, they would enlarge the lifting strakes. Again, less boat in the water, the faster it's going to go. The problem is today, those people take those same boats that had a lot of lift built into them to achieve that number. They put big power in them, and they find that the boat will not handle. And the reason is that the boat itself, the vehicle, has way too much lift built into it, and it'll drive itself right out of the water.
That's, what I never even thought about that or knew about that. That's interesting because these boats were built from the beginning of the industry. I mean, the big blocks had 330 horse, right? Like I remember like Harman came out with that 405 package. It was a 400 horsepower big block, and that was the big deal back then, you know. So yeah, now, God, every crate engine out there's got 500 or better, right? So it's definitely not what they were designed for. I didn't think about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, but we run into that kind of a problem all the time. Guys look in and they have a handling problem. And I just had a customer call me yesterday. He goes, Greg, I got this boat and it will not, it porpoises like crazy. I said, well, does it porpoise at high speeds? No. And I said, let me ask you something. Does it have a droop suit on it? Yeah. And I said, take the droop suit off and put a stock nozzle housing on it. That will probably eliminate 70 to 80% of your problem, because some boats just do not like a droop snoot. They do not having the pump back. There's some boats that are just bad that way. So you have to seek advice that somebody's knowledgeable, especially on the personality of that particular boat, so you don't that's gonna create some handling problems.
Now, so I always, through the years, when a guy would come to me and ask me without problem, say, look, this thing just porpoises like crazy in the mid range, but it runs great in the top end. My response, and maybe this has been wrong, my response was always like, well, for the 400 horsepower you have, that's awesome, because the thing's giving you lift and performance. And so maybe you put some plates on it, or maybe you put a diverter on it to kind of calm it down in the mid range where you're cruising. But it's actually, most of the time you're trying, at least in the older boats, you're trying to get them to lift. Most of them are so old and heavy and they've got hooks. It's hard to get them, not wet. So that's always been kind of my thing on that. It's different too, though, when you've got a lot of horsepower.
Well, hook is something that is not manufactured in the boat. It's generated from post-cure. The boat's pulled out of the mold. It's put on a dolly. I don't know of any manufacturer that I'm aware of that puts hook in the bottom of his boat. But on the other hand, there are some manufacturers out there. Again, this was back in the 70s and 80s and even maybe 90s. They put rocker in the bottom of the boat. And the rocker was designed to, again, generate nose lift, generate less wetted surface. But the drawback is that cruising speeds, it's just like a rocking shell. If you don't support the rocker back, it's going to continue to rock forward. It'll pick up and then rock forward, and it's going to generate, that porpoising effect at cruising. So there's some boats that just, like I said, that just do not like droop snoots or moving the pump back.
Interesting. So we started talking a little bit about plumbing and running a motor on the garden hose, and had a little technical hiccup. So I don't know if I got it all. So I'll ask you again. You started to talk about kind of the number one thing if you're going to run your boat on the hose is to start the engine before you start the water.
Yes.
For people just kind of basics on jet boats, they don't have a regular, like a cast iron water pump like a car does. And in the boat world, we call that a circulating pump, because all that really does is once you get water into the motor, that pump helps it to circulate through the motor. A jet doesn't need that, right? So
usually, if you have a recirculating pump on the front of the engine, it's also a thermostat controlled system. Some of the early Berkeley package jet motors had a recirculating pump on it. But, all the time that I worked at Eliminator rigging, and even up until now, guys, they put a gate valve. We put a gate valve on the pump. The people have used that through the years to regulate the temperature. The problem with that is that we didn't put the gate valve on the boats back then to regulate temperature. We did that as a safety feature. Because what was happening early on, some of those engines would burst or break the inlet hose to the motor, generating too much pressure. And so we installed a gate valve in case that happened to one of our customers. They could shut the gate valve off. That would not push water to the engine, and they could nurse it back to shore rather than flooding the boat.
Glad you segued in there. I want to finish one more thing on the starting with the hose, but yeah, Gate, you went right down the alley I would want to go. So the reason I mentioned the circulating pump is so a jet boat doesn't need that. It picks up the water, it, pulls water out of the pump and circulates it through the motor, but it's all force fed. Okay. So it forces into the motor, however your exhaust is set up, and then back out the exhaust. But the problem is if you start that hose without that engine running and allowing the exhaust to push the water out of the motor, that water can back up, fill all the cavities, and actually fill back up into the motor and hydraulic the motor, which means it got water into the cylinders. Water's not compressible. And like you were saying earlier, when you get water in the cylinders, it'll act like it doesn't, like you got a bad starter because it won't compress that water. And man, you have too, I'm sure. What water does to a motor when it's running and you hydraulic a motor, man, it will just pretzel a rod like it's crazy. So always number one thing is start that engine first, then crack the hose on. And also you don't have to crack the hose on 3 turns. I mean, you do half a turn and you're set.
See, on an engine that has log manifolds on it and a riser, it's with the nose elevated, it would be pretty hard to hydraulic that engine.
Yeah,
the biggest problem is, and this goes back to the John Bassett days when the Bassett water injected header was first introduced. We had a situation where the boat or the engine could fill up with water.
Mm-hmm.
That's why if you look at the Bassett headers of today, they all had little bleeder hose right above or right in front of the injector line.
Mm-hmm.
So if the engine did shut off prematurely, that it would be able to bleed that excess water off and try to eliminate any kind of a hydraulic condition at that point in time. Mm-hmm. So it was a growing thing with John at Bassett, and that particular modification is made on all the headers, water injected headers that are out there today.
Okay, so but going back to logs, I agree with you. It's pretty hard to do that, and you could probably sit there and turn the motor on, let the water circulate through, pour out the exhaust, and you'd be fine. But it is possible for it to back up, so it's kind of not worth. My opinion is it's not worth the chance. Start the engine, then crank the water, and that way you're 100% safe.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely correct. But the one drawback on the log manifolds and risers is that you have a gasket that goes between the exhaust manifold and the riser. You still can hydraulic the motor, especially if and it's hard. Sometimes we get boats in here that it's obvious that gasket is compromised.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if that gasket is compromised, you would be dumping water right back into that exhaust log.
Mm-hmm.
So again, hydraulicking the engine is possible.
Yeah. Which you make a good point there on riser gaskets, especially it's even more so if you've got like a later model upswept style manifold, that gasket, I mean, that should be a service item. Once a year when you service that boat, you should pull that riser off, check, because the water jackets are very thin right there. So it's very easy to eat through a gasket. And like Greg said, now you're mixing water and exhaust and you got a problem.
Well, that's the other thing on these late model center rise manifolds and risers. One real good indicator is that you can, when the boat comes in for service, you can see that there would be water that would be running down the side of the exhaust manifold. Well, that's a pretty good indicator that the gasket itself is either failed or starting to fail. So with that happening, the riser gasket should be addressed, because what will happen is that if that gasket is leaking, it will dump water right into the two center cylinders. And again, hydraulicing is a possibility.
Yep, perfect. So back to the gate valve. So we know just about every jet boat ever made and boat built, I mean, it should have that gate valve coming in from the jet pump, like Greg said. It's a safety factor. It's there to shut the water off if you need it. It's there to shut the water off to the pump if you want to put a T there to make sure the water, when you're running it on a garden hose, is going in the motor and not back into the pump, taking the path of least resistance like Greg talked about earlier. But what that gate valve is not for, in my opinion, and Greg, we can talk about this, that gate valve is not there to regulate engine temperature. And I've always been taught, and engine builders I've talked to said that you never want to regulate the amount of water you bring into a motor. It's almost like a fuel system. You want to get as much volume there as you can, and then you regulate the output to control the temperature. Either that's with making smaller outlet size on the hose, a thermostat kit. We can talk about those, but you don't want to regulate the inlet water into a motor. And guys, I read guys all the time say you have to have that gate valve. You got to adjust it. You got to use your temperature, and that's just not the correct way to do it. Do you agree?
Well, there's a couple things that you've hit on. Number one, we dyno quite a few motors at West Tech, and in doing that, Steve at West Tech Burley when we dyno the motor, our water temperature is under 120 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
A cool engine is less likely to detonate. If you turn especially on today's gasoline, if you turn the temperature up on a gasoline engine today, and it has more heat in it, it's more likely to detonate on the fuel that we have. The other thing is that when you slow the amount of water going to the engine, what happens is that the water at idle it could go up to 160, 170, 180, and depending on how long it's idle. Then once you get past that 5 mile an hour buoy, you get on the accelerate, and what are you doing? You're basically douching the engine at that point in time with cold water. So it doesn't take much to realize that if you've got a hot cylinder and you turn around and introduce cold water to it, the likelihood of cracking that cylinder head over a period of time becomes a lot greater.
Mm-hmm. I've
always ran a free-flowing system. Now, there are certain incidences where we will use a pressure relief, and we've had, on occasion, I've had engines that for whatever reason they generate more block pressure, but we want to have the block pressure somewhere between 15 to 25 psi, and if we cannot achieve that, then what we'll do is we do put a pressure relief valve in the system that will dump water that's set at 15 to 18 psi. So when it goes off, it'll dump that extra water overboard. But the volume of water is still there. All we're doing is that we're eliminating some of the pressure.
Yeah, exactly. So like with what I was saying with the gate valve, where the gate valve, and hopefully I'm not going against some hydrodynamic law here, but so the gate valve, you're actually restricting water in the motor. With a pressure relief, the motor always has all it needs. You're just blowing off what it doesn't need. It's almost like a the fuel bypass fuel system, where the carburetor or the fuel injection always has what it needs. You're just bypassing what it doesn't need. You keep it in the system. So in other words, you're not reducing it. You're just bypassing it. So, and that's another good thing to talk about on the pressure relief valve. You're picking up water from the jet pump, but you're picking it up on the back side of the impeller. So that's kind of the low pressure side of the impeller, correct? So not every jet boat, in fact, millions of jet boats produced through the years never had a pressure relief valve on them, and they're fine. There are instances, and especially probably in the case of where you're really spinning a lot of RPM, where a pressure relief valve is a good idea. And obviously there's some cases where it's absolutely necessary, but it's not 100% necessary, because not every jet boat has 50 pounds of pressure because of the way it's plumbed.
Again, the computer that we use on the race boats, we are able to monitor suction housing pressure, and we also are able to monitor bowl pressure. On the average ski boat, I would say on the inlet side or the front side of the impeller, we're probably seeing anywhere from 25 to 40 psi. Mm-hmm. On the back side, you're probably going to be seeing, and I've never really put a computer or a pressure sensor on a stock bull, but I would think that 200 psi, mm-hmm. because in the race boats, it's not uncommon for us to see 350 to 400 mm-hmm. in that. That's why in some instances we have, I know there was a manufacturer of turbocharged engines years ago, and every one of his engines that we got, it had a pressure relief valve on it. Mm-hmm. But on the average ski boat, we did not. There's thousands of jet boats out there, family jet boats, that do not have any kind of a pressure relief. But I do highly recommend some sort of a valve back there, not to regulate temperature, but in case of something were to rupture in the engine's water system, that you had the ability to shut the water down coming from the pump. Mm-hmm.
And I misspoke. I made the common mistake. I said backside, when truthfully that's the front side of the impeller has the lower pressure. So that's the front side closer to the front of the boat. I always call it the backside, because when you're building a pump, you always think about that. But anyhow, so yes. But going back to what you said, they don't have to have them. It's never going to hurt to have a pressure relief valve. If it's something you want to just be safe and sound, do it. It's also really good to have a pressure gauge somewhere in the system that you truthfully know where you're at. But it's don't feel like I just know I see a lot of guys, they buy a jet boat and the first thing they do is they're panicking because it doesn't have a pressure relief valve on it. And so, yeah. So then what do you recommend if a guy, because obviously most jet boats, especially out here in California, or actually I should say out, in Midwest where it's really cold, if you want to get some heat in the motor, how do you recommend doing it? What's your thoughts on like the old Covico or Rex Marine or CP Performance thermostat kits? Or
you're going to be operating the boat in conditions that cold water conditions. They I think Rex used to make one. I think CP Performance has one today, but I would go to that 4 outlet thermostat housing, but only I would run that in the colder temperatures. And during the summer on those lakes back there, then it's not really required. But if they're going to run the boat in the winter where the water is in the 30s and 40 degree range, I would definitely run a thermostat kit. Mm-hmm.
And I always say, if you're going to run a thermostat kit, then I always say that's a case where I always would say put a pressure relief valve on it at that point, because there's going to be times when you're going to build a little more pressure because of a thermostat kit.
Yes.
So, okay, great. I'm glad we talked about that stuff, because on that thermostat kit was actually developed like in the late 70s, early 80s by Jack Salmon at Covico. And I happened to be working at Rex at the time when Jack retired. Actually, Jack he sold the steering wheel company, but when he sold the steering wheel company to a guy named Jim Brown in Missouri, he actually kept that thermostat kit, all that part of the business, just to give himself something to do. Well, he came over to us at Rex and kind of gave us the exclusive on it. So we were actually buying all the parts and assembling them and selling them. And when Jack passed away, we just kind of kept that thing. He didn't have any relatives, so we kept building them. And then when the business got slow or whatever, quit building them. And so CP builds them now. CP has in fact, I think CP makes it out of stainless now. I tell guys on the internet all the time, I think it's a really good system. It was designed really well. It has a plastic check valve, and it's a good piece. So just for some history there.
Yeah, see, now I wasn't aware of that. I don't know where it originated, but one of the reasons I was told, getting back to colder temperatures, that's why Berkeley opted to go with an oil bath bushing assembly. From what I understand, it was designed for that boat that sat in the water and had water in the bowl. The water would not freeze around the shaft, prevent breakage in the back of the bowl. There are people today, instead of putting oil back in the bowl, they have chose to put grease back in it, and that's not really how that bowl was designed. American Turbine, Dominator, they use a greasable Zerk on the back of their bowl, but on the Berkeley's, oil bath in the back was designed for freezing temperatures, so that it would not crack the bowl.
I've never heard that one. That makes sense.
Yeah. Talking to the guys, the engineers at Berkeley, they really did. They did an awful lot of R&D when Berkeley, back in their heyday, they had a lot of really good, smart engineers that developed a lot of this stuff that we still use today.
Mm-hmm. I know the Dominators, they didn't even use an encapsulated area back there, right? They just left that. They didn't have a bowl end cap, and they basically just let it water lubricate.
They're called glacier bearings. Denotes water lubricated bearings. I can remember at Eliminator when Bruce Simmons, who started Dominator, came by, and that was one of his selling features, is that no more lube in the back of the bowl. It was exposed to the water. The only problem that I've seen with that through the years is that a boat that's set for a long period of time, you can start that thing up with a non-lubricated tail shaft, and it'll make one hell of a noise, a loud squeal when that area is not lubricated.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's a lot of that discussion about the grease versus the oil, and that's what I would always come back to. And people would ask me, I'd say, look, Dominator designed this water lubed, so truthfully, if you get some grease in there, you get some oil in there, they live without any of that, so it's not super critical area, especially in the older days when they used a hard chrome shaft. Now, most of the shafts now that end isn't hard chromed. They just make them out of stainless steel, but it's still hard enough, I think, to live in that environment. Most of your
pump manufacturers today have gotten away from the stainless steel, and they're running some sort of a 17-4 or an Aquamet or much harder shaft. So we really don't see that kind of a problem. But whenever I get an old Dominator bowl in, I recommend putting a greasable assembly in it. Dominator or American Turbine, Ronnie up at American Turbine will machine the bowl, and we put a greasable fitting in the back of that.
Okay, gotcha. Well, that's awesome. And I hope, there's a bunch of, Greg and I have talked about this in the past. There's just a lot of little things that people get kind of sideways on that really shouldn't get sideways on them. So hopefully I think we covered some of that. So that was awesome. I didn't mean to get into that so soon, but thanks for bringing it up, and I'm glad you did. And so, yeah, fantastic. Let's get into one little nostalgia piece. Searching through one of my old powerboats, or somehow I found some pictures of you where you went upside down in Underdog. And that's your Eliminator Daytona that we had talked about.
That was Dash for Cash.
Oh, Dash for Cash. Okay, different boat. And I'd ask you about it, and you told me that I guess at one point you decided to put a blown motor in the boat, and that's where it went. So you want to talk about that?
Well, back in those days, we were not opposed to trying different things. Back in those days, blown gas jet was restricted to a Vertex or a Mallory mag, an 871 blower. We had to run an iron block, and we could run aluminum heads, and we could not exceed 500 cubic inches. So the playing field was pretty level. Everybody out there had to adhere to the same rules. And so we were doing anything that we could to generate more speed as we raced the boat. So Norm, myself, and Jeff Bennett, it was not unusual for us to go to, Norm had a place at Blue Water Lagoon down in Parker, and we'd go there and we'd have a milk crate full of different stuff to try. Sometimes it was ride plate lengths, it was different loaders, it was different nozzle sizes. We were trying things all the time to improve our performance. Well, we got the bright idea that on the inside of the outside sponsons, we thought we would trap more air. So what we did was we dropped the inside edges about 4 feet in length. We dropped them with a piece of aluminum 3/4 of an inch. So what we did is that we actually trapped more air underneath the hull. Well, we took the boat to Chowchilla, and because of the way we were running the boats years ago, a lot of nose attitude, we packed more air underneath the boat, and we successfully set the new blown gas jet record at 131 miles an hour. Well, came back from Chowchilla. I think we won that event, set a new record. It was a great weekend for us. Well, being young and stupid, we decided that if 3/4 of an inch good, an inch has got to be a whole lot better. Well, at that time, they had a lake out there called Skiland. So they put bleachers in out there. They had a timing tower at the end of the track. And in the middle of the bleachers, there was a split, about probably 50 to 75 feet wide. Anyway, I got out there with the class, and I was racing Lynn Roslin, who ran blown gas jet, and we took off, and I got to about half track with these 1.5-inch strips on the inside of the sponsons, and the boat was extremely loose. When I came on the other side of the bleachers, right off of the starting line, the wind had shifted from right to left to right, which in a jet boat is not a good thing because the boat's torquing to the right. Well, I came through the end of the bleachers, the wind hit me, and the next thing I know, I was looking at an upside down horizon, and I crashed the boat. I came out of it pretty smooth. I banged up my kidneys pretty good. I cut my left wrist. I needed stitches in that, but all in all, I was pretty lucky. I got to the hospital, and the doctor was cleaning my wrist out. The adrenaline had worn off, and I was a little bit of pain in my lower back. And he was with a pair of tweezers. He was cleaning out my arm, and he looked and says, "Oh, you've got a broken wrist. These are bone fragments." Oh. And I looked at him and I said, "Well, I don't think so." I said, "That's gel coat from the nose of the boat." And sure enough, that's what it was. What happened is that the boat took off going approximately 125, 130 miles an hour, and it came over backwards. And I was told by an old veteran years ago when I first started doing this, "Greg, whatever happens, if the thing gets out of shape, you get the hell away from that boat." The man's name was Al Bush. And those words were right there in my mind. And when I tipped over backwards, I was literally standing in the bottom of the boat, upside down, pushing myself out of the boat. I landed in the water. The boat came over and with the wind rotated on top of me, and I think it was the left front sponson, rotated onto my wrist. That's what cut my wrist, and that's where the gel coat came from.
Oh my gosh.
Being that I worked for Eliminator, I had access to the 19 Daytona molds. I got a boat built and was back in the boat 2 weeks later, again at Chowchilla with a brand new boat, and we ended up winning that event. Wow. So Bob Leach, the owner of Eliminator, and Norm, and all the guys at Eliminator got me back in the boat at Chowchilla. It was still kind of difficult for me to move around, but I got back in the boat and we ended up winning the event. So,
oh my gosh,
that was one of my not so good days.
Well, every boat racer has that one, right? Now, that's the first time you've been on your head like that?
Actually, no. Back in the early days when I was running, not Dash for Cash, but was running Underdog, I was out one evening at Parker, and I had been racing I had a 100-mile-an-hour plus jet boat on the river back in the 70s. Mm-hmm. That was kind of unheard of. Mm-hmm. So I'd go out and pick on anything I possibly could to race. Anyway, Saturday ended. We went back to the trailer, got up Sunday morning, and one of my employees wanted to go for a ride. And I said, okay. So we put the boat in the water. And I'm sure everybody that's been on the Parker Strip is familiar with Branson's. And back in those days, there was the Jolly Knight, the Desert Star, the Thunderbird, which is no longer there today. But I made a pass out in front of them. And as I was slowing down, had a pair of trunks on, no helmet, no jacket, no pin. And Eric Brown was sitting shotgun, tall guy, probably 6'3" or 4. The loader grate broke.
Oh.
And when the loader grate broke, it went up inside the pump and nosed the boat in and catapulted us out in front of the boat, probably, 100 feet, 150 feet. I hit the water. And when I hit the water, I looked around downriver and I go, shit, the boat's gone. And as I turned around, there was Underdog sitting there floating upriver from us. Eric was closer to the boat than me. I swam back. As I'm swimming back, my wallet hit me in the face. I got back in the boat, and by that time, my friends that were on the shore across the river came out, towed the boat back in, and that was my first encounter of crashing a jet boat. So we were probably doing, as we were slowing down, I would say probably 90 to 100 miles an hour. So
wow,
that was quite an experience. I went to Havasu, and everything checked out okay, and came back and surveyed the damage, and actually the boat came through it pretty good. The only problem was that the loader grate was broken, and to this day, one of the things that I religiously do is that I always, when we're running the jet boat, I'm always checking that hardware. I wouldn't want this to happen to anybody else. Through the course of the years, I've seen this hardware is easily overlooked, but you got to remember that hardware hanging down underneath the bottom of the boat is scooping, 100 plus mile an hour water. And so it's something that should be checked all the time. And like I said, that's something that I do religiously when we're running our jet boat in competition. Always check that hardware.
So do you pull the loaders out and actually look at welds and that kind of stuff?
I do that before the race, but during the race, I will get underneath there, and it's simple to do. We call it the ding test. I'll just take a wrench or a ratchet and tap on it, and you can hear it ding. And it goes dunk, then we know that we've got something going on, and we'll take it out. We always carry a couple different loaders.
Gotcha. Glad you brought this up, because that's another little simple thing that probably about every jet boater should do. It doesn't hurt. Those loader bolts, they're just drilled and tapped in the aluminum from the factory. You should go in there and through bolt those things, and nuts and bolts.
A stock jet boat, it's just a grill. Mm-hmm. And if they start putting any kind of loader grate in it, I highly recommend that you drill out the 1/4-20 screws and drill them out, tap them to 5/16, and use a grade 8 bolt, not a stainless bolt, but a grade 8 bolt, and then run to the top, and then put a lock washer on them on top. Mm-hmm. And they should be checked, realistically every time you take the boat out. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And grade 8 could rust too, but that's just life. You'd rather have a stronger bolt.
Grade 8 will rust, but one of the things that we do at the end of a race is that I go underneath there and I loosen everything up in the ride plate and shoe area. And I do the same thing with the loader grate. And then when I get back to the shop before the next race, that loader grate will come out and be checked and then reinstalled.
Yeah, great tip. I'll go back. I'll be the old guy too, that when you got thrown out of Underdog on the Parker Strip, but hopefully that was the last time you were out doing that without a jacket on.
That is correct.
Okay. Good. It's funny. I got a friend of mine. He's a younger guy, and he's got an 80 mile an hour Eliminator formula. I think we talked about it. He's the guy that you helped me. And he gets so much flack from all of his buddies because he always wears a jacket, and he just gets flack from everybody. And it's so funny that I don't know if it's funny, but it's kind of amazing that, and he hangs with some guys that have 90, 100 mile an hour boats, and so. Wear your life jackets.
A lot of those guys that do that, and I was guilty of it, but I don't do it anymore. And what I tell them is that, you know what? I don't care if you don't run a jacket, but the first thing that's going to happen is that somebody's going to come running over and telling me that you crashed, and I'm not going to, if I go out looking for you, I want you to at least pop up, somewhere on the water so I can find you. Mm-hmm. I can remember an incident where a good friend of mine, Sonny Holloway, out in front of Sundance, was racing his Sanger flat bottom. The boat broke in half right in front of the V drive. No jacket on, and just through the grace of God, one of our buddies in a Campbell whaler just happened to see him floating by underwater, and was able to jump in and grab him. And he had gotten tangled up in the cables of steering and had almost cut his leg off right above the knee. So if he'd have had a jacket on, it would have been a whole lot easier to perform the rescue. But I highly recommend, if you're going to go out there and haul ass, put your jacket on.
And just like the scenario you described with Underdog, I mean, here you are, this boat's got the best of everything, you just don't know. You're putting all this stuff under so much load, so much stress, you just don't know. So you can be the most confident driver in the world. I'll tell you, probably the guy that's probably driven more performance boats in the world, probably Bob Teague, and I'll bet you ask him, he never gets into a boat without a jacket, because you just never know.
We just don't. Even when we do the evaluations, the only time that we do not wear a jacket is that we're doing the photo shoots in the boat. But all the rest of the performance evaluations that we perform, everybody's got a jacket on. Everybody.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I forgot about that. You're still doing the boat tests?
Yeah, we just did one here a couple months ago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I think you guys you did that at Hot Boat, same thing. Hot Boat, performance boats, speed boats. You've been doing that a long time.
I've been doing the evaluations. I stayed with Chris Davidson, and we were talking about it, but I've been doing that since the early 80s, and I'm one of the last. Bob Teague was with Powerboat while I was still doing Hot Boat and performance boats, but most of the old team is gone. Mm-hmm. It's just me and Chris basically are the only ones left.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. God, hundreds of boats, huh?
Yeah, when I go to the river today for myself, I just sold a pontoon boat, and that was a 25-footer. It became harder and harder to take it in and take it out of the water, so I ended up selling that, and then I bought a little 22-foot Hurricane deck boat, and that's what I have now at the river. And then I've got a little 14-foot. I got a little 14-foot aluminum boat with a 50 horse on it, and that's so. That's
your fishing duck hunting boat?
No, we shoot carp off of it with bows.
Do you really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I guess if there's something that's good to kill, it's carp, right?
It's carp, yeah.
Well, hey, cool, man. I kept you for a long time. Thanks for talking this morning. And I'm so glad we talked about that tech stuff. That was cool.
You got it. Anytime, Joe.
All right, man.
Thank you for listening to Powerboat Talk. If you like what you've heard, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. For more Powerboat Talk, follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or visit our website at powerboattalk.com.